We had a chance briefly in the afternoon to take a little bit of an excursion, asking ourselves why we are here. But maybe to set the tone, we have to go back in history. Maybe we have to go back in history to the 23rd of March in the year 1775, where at the St. John's Church, a young man stood up to address the House of Burgesses. He said, "No man thinks more highly of the patriotism of the worthy gentleman who just addressed the House, but different men often find difference in the character and the opinions that they share." And I'm paraphrasing. But he goes on in his speech to say that the next gale that we hear that comes in from the north will be the sound of resounding arms. And then he asks a question. He says, "Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? For is life so dear or peace so sweet that it be purchased at the price of the chains of slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I don't know what path others might take, but for me, give me liberty or give me death." And a nation marched forward. Thus spake Patrick Henry. Fast forward to the middle 60s. Lying on a nondescript beach in a remote southern Indian town, I looked at the ships leaving the harbor, wondering if any of them would have my story. And in the year 1986, clutching everything I had, I came to this country. And back then in New York, they had something that was inscribed in the John F. Kennedy Airport that they have since changed, but this was the original inscription that was on the Statue of Liberty. It was Emma Lazarus's New Colossus. "Keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cried she with silent lips. "Send me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these your homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." And that was the welcoming sign of the Bartholdi statue in the New York harbor. But if you go to the JFK airport today, they have sanitized words. See, words matter. When Patrick Henry spoke those words, they mattered. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence and he says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident and among themselves are unalienable rights, and these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and governments are instituted amongst men so that we can secure the rights of the governed." So those of you who campaign, those of you who run, those of you who vote, those of you who are elected, we have to realize that the sacred honor that we take is not the fact that we get to participate in the process. The sacred honor is we take those unalienable rights given by a creator God to these people, and we take that with us because it's a republic. It's never been a democracy. And this journey fascinated me in my 35 years in this country. I've traveled much of the free world. I've flapped my gums now in 75 countries in 6 continents. I remember one time I was speaking in Istanbul, Turkey, and a gentleman came up to me and there was a parade talking about death to America. And I said, "Don't worry about hating America. Most people who hate her already live there." It is not a war. It is not a fight. We have a republic to save. That very Thomas Jefferson who wrote the Declaration of Independence, those very 56 men who signed it, signing their death warrant that day, said, a good democracy, a good republic, a good framework is probably about 200 years before it starts feeding on itself. That same Thomas Jefferson became the Thomas Jefferson Research Institute, which in 1958 said the percentage of morality in American schools is so minuscule it's not even worth counting. I've done prison ministry for 30 years, and the one thing you'll never find in prisons in America are people of Jewish origin. What has a Jewish father done since the days of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that keeps his children out of trouble? "God bless you, my son. I love you, my son," and then a hug or a kiss. Folks, we don't have a crime problem. We have a father-son problem. We want to talk about values. We don't want to talk about the family. We want to talk about rights, and we act as if that we're going to violate with our feet firmly planted in midair. Truth by nature is exclusive. And today I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm going to paint for you 4 moods. But in this, I want to offer you something which is unqualified hope. But that hope begins with a rally cry, and the rally cry has to come from the very word character. When Dr. Martin Luther King made that famous speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and said, I have a dream that one day my 4 children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, an entire race of people moved forward with the first part, color, maybe rightfully so, and being disenfranchised. But the second part was the most important part to a humble immigrant like me, the word character. Character is the ability to have pride in the mundane. The mundane is what we do every day. Unless we are desiring to play the long game, we will not save this republic. We have to go back to the very foundations of our school, indoctrinate it in a very different way. And the reason I'm sharing these tenets with you, and you may be wondering, I've heard all this before, but I have done this all over this country and with great immunity. I'll give you a classic story. Before I was supposed to speak in Concord, Massachusetts, ironic that they would invite an immigrant to Concord, Massachusetts, where the first shot of the Revolutionary War was fired. I said, why are you inviting me? He says, well, you speak American history with great sophistication. What they were saying is, we need some dude from India who looks like you to come and speak to an all-inclusive crowd here so we can check a box. I love American history not to check a box. I love American history because it's the only place on planet Earth where at least one person from every other principality and municipality around the world recognized by the United Nations has called it home. You find me another country like this, and I will take my words back. Nothing exists like this out there. So when I got invited to come to speak to Concord, Massachusetts, I was excited. Immigrant's dream. I came here with $9 in my pocket, and they're inviting me to come and speak at the seatbed of what began a revolution that dethroned the imperial Britain. And then I get that all-inclusive call 3 days before. Hey, by the way, would you mind not speaking about politics, relationship, or religion? Well, without those three, I have no speech. I said, I'll give it a shot. Can I quote some of the founding fathers? I heard they were from your area. They said, sure, and I opened my speech with this, as I will with you. Daniel Webster. If we and our posterity reject religious instruction and authority, violate the principles of eternal ethics, trifle on moral injunction, and recklessly destroy the political constitution that upholds us, no man can say how sudden the catastrophe that will overwhelm us and bury all our glory in profound obscurity. And all 4 of those moods have come to pass. As soon as I said that, the crowd erupted. The man who had invited me was now in angst. He called me afterwards and said, you violated every one of my edicts, but you did it with immunity. Bravo. I said, yeah, it's called the First Amendment. Duh. Why are we afraid? Truth is on your side. History is on your side. People have been coming to these shores for opportunity, and yet we have bloviating people giving you. I remember I was in D.C. when this big name debacle took place with the Washington Redskins. And someone said, do you have a problem with that, being from India? I said, different Indian? How ignorant are you? I said, but I do have a problem. They said, oh, good. Yeah, I said, we need to drop the word Washington. Seems to be the bigger problem here. Majoring in minors. Majoring in minors. We've got an entire group. Now, this goes for all of you who are trying to elevate yourself to the next level. The reason I bring up some of these very powerful statements is if you decide to run for office, you have to ask yourself that one question. Are you running because you are now considering yourself a torchbearer of someone else's sacred honor, which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And in that, the only thing that has a qualifier is happiness. It's a pursuit. Happiness is not guaranteed. But life and liberty are. People died for that right, so that immigrants like me in far-off countries could come here one day and say, land of the free, home of the brave. I remember going through New York scared. I remember 20 years later sitting in Mayor Rudy Giuliani's seats at a baseball game, watching the planes take off from that same airport, realizing 20 years later the dream does exist, it does come alive. But hope is the foundational quality of all change. Alfred Adler said that. John Maxwell said, if there's hope in the future, there's power in the present. But one of the things that I find very fascinating is a word and a phraseology I want to give you from my mentor, Mr. Zig-Ziglar. He said, you can have everything in life you want if you just help enough other people get what they want. But that has to be a philosophy. It cannot be a tactic. You cannot do anything, whether it is a law or a bylaw. You cannot do anything unless it's the right thing to do. Everything else falls and it dies a death of 1,000 qualifications. I get asked questions all the time. People come up to me, "You're from India, aren't you? What gave it away, Sherlock?" "My doctor is Indian. Do you know him?" "No, he doesn't know me either." That's what we call frivolous conversation. And let me take you to the 5 moods of communication before I get on with the 4 motifs I want to paint for you, and then I'll hush and we'll do a Q&A. But the first mood of communication you have to understand is there is something very prevalent in every gathering in this world, and it's called frivolous communication. But before I say anything about frivolous communication, let me give you a qualifier. And I'm going to make a statement now. It may anger some of you, but I'll stay here long enough so you can come apologize to me. And here's the statement: political correctness will be the death of this nation. Frivolous communication is the communication you would have with a teenager. "Where are you going?" "Nowhere." "What you going to do?" "Nothing." "Who you going to go with?" "No one." "When you going to come back?" "Don't know." "Can you spot me $20? Let me get this straight. You want to go nowhere with no one to do nothing and not know when you're coming back, but you want me to finance it. I ain't the government. It's not how life works. Now, the reason I want you to get away from frivolous communication is convenient, and it hinges on this thing called political correctness. People are afraid. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. For example, if I stood here and told you I was prejudiced, you would immediately think I was racist, because they hijacked the dictionary. But prejudice, according to the English dictionary, is just a preference for. What if I added the qualifier? I'm prejudiced towards my bride over everybody else's. You'd say, okay, that's a good man. Words matter. If I walked up to my bride and I said, "Sweetheart, you look like the first day of spring," I'd sound romantic. If I tell her, "You look like the last day of a long, hard winter," it's the same day. It would have a diametrically opposite meaning. If I said, "When I look at you, the hands of time cease," I sound like Milton. If I tell her, "You got a face that'll stop a clock," I get hit with a frying pan. We need to get away from frivolous nonsense, because the language of communication that our founding fathers, folks, think about this. Never before in the history of humanity did a group of men decide to write a charter that liberated a nation and gave it its framework for the next 200 years, because we went straight from being allegiant to an imperial thing and coming into freedom. France never had that luxury. No country that came out of any kind of occupation had that joy. And that was because of the genius of these men. Words matter. So get away from frivolous communication. Sometimes in Dallas, people will walk up to me and say, "Can you believe the heat?" Yep. I've been in Dallas 35 years. I've never accidentally seen a snowflake in summer. What is your point? Level 2 is factual. If you get away from frivolous factual, that's Sergeant Friday-esque. And if you get away from factual communication, it may save your marriage. I remember one time I walked home and my bride said, "Apparently I'm the only one in the house who knows how to load a dishwasher." I answered yes. Wrong answer. Factual communication will get you a little further than frivolous, but you need to get away from both factual and frivolous communication to at least have feeling. See, in frivolous communication, nobody cares you're there. In factual communication, they're just reacting because you're there. "Oh, do you believe we're going to win in November?" "Yeah." Didn't advance anything. Just two people shouting. Feeling is when people start to act because you're there. That's when response comes into the picture. Let me give you an illustration. Let's say you went to the doctor's office. Probably an Indian. But you went to a doctor's office. And the doctor gives you medicine. And a week later you go back to the doctor and the doctor says, "Your body is reacting." That's negative. The doctor says, "Your body is responding." That's positive. Feeling is always anchored in response, not reaction. And we are very good at reacting as conservatives. Hear me carefully on this statement. When will meets imagination, put your money on imagination. We are out there talking about logic and low taxes, and we're going to take care of you, and we're going to protect these amendments, and these are all nice features. They're talking about emotion. They're selling air. And that's working. I'm going to promise you the moon. How do you combine the two? You begin to realize that unless you're able to offer the logic that you have in the feeling. So let me give you the way you do it. Some people tell you what you need to hear. Other people will tell you what you want to hear. You need to be the kind of person who tells people what they need to hear in a way they want to hear it. And the way you do it is you don't look against, you look at them, you stand side by side, look in the same direction. Everybody has dreams. Mr. Zig-Ziglar wrote a book called See You at the Top. He said everybody in the world wants the same 8 things: to be happy, to be healthy, to be reasonably prosperous. I know some of you want to be unreasonably prosperous. It's the Republican way. I've had money, I haven't had it. Overall, it's better to have it. It's no secret. Money bought me a house. Actually, it bought me 2. I'm going to Albania. It may buy me 3. But it never bought me a home with laughter. Bought me a bed. Never bought me a good night's sleep. Bought me a good time. Never peace of mind. Bought me a companion. Never a friend. I like the things money will buy. And you can get everything in this world that money will buy without a lick of character. But you cannot get any of the things money won't buy without that character. And that's when things begin to change. Can you sell character? Can you sell virtue? Can you sell value? Dennis Waitley, that fighter pilot of the Navy era who wrote The Psychology of Winning, said value is in the doer, not the deed. We need to have intrinsic worth. If you suffer from insomnia, I recommend you pick up a book called The History of European Morals from Augustus to Charlemagne, written by W.E.H. Lecky, who was not by any stance of the thing a person you would consider conservative. He would have probably been a liberal and even a skeptic. But I went back and traced where morality fell. Morality fell when we began to defend what was intrinsic and began to replace it with what was extrinsic. This is where subjective and objective entered the lexicon. And you're saying, why does that matter? Why does the philosophical nature of that matter? Rah, rah, go get 'em tiger, gung-ho, flag-waving patriot doesn't work anymore because you're not selling imagination. Our kids, who are seeing the depth of depravity and the height of immorality and the breadth of debauchery on a device by the time they're 10, have lost all wonder. And we have some people who are former airline pilots here, but they'll tell you this. When a young kid comes onto the plane for the very first time to make their flight, and the flight attendant knows that and tells the pilot that we've got a young kid on, and the young kid will turn and look at that fuselage with all those lights and go, wow, wonder. What we are losing in this world is wonder, and the reason we are losing wonder is we have already sacrificed innocence. And when we go back and paint a picture of a future that is holistic and beautiful, we have to paint it. I see a lot of campaign ads, and it always talks about what they did, who they are, what they will do, and then a byline, husband. You go to my email address. I've written 6 books. I've been the vice president of a company. I founded 2 other companies. I'm the president of a ministry. My email ID for the last 20 years has always said, Anila's husband, Nick's dad. That's a blessing. Everything else is a choice. Mary Crowley, who founded Home Interiors, brilliant businessman, $500 million company. Her son Don Carter went on to buy the Dallas Mavericks. Mary Crowley said, you are free up until the moment of choice. Then the choice controls the chooser. How then do we live? Said Francis Schaeffer. Let me paint some moods for you. But before I do that, I'm going to read something for you by a gentleman by the name of G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton wrote a book called Orthodoxy. The irony of ironies is if you go to Kindle, you can get the life works of G.K. Chesterton for $2.99, 23 volumes of brilliance. 50 Shades of Stupidity is $19.99. We pay more for vulgarity and debauchery and voyeurism than we pay for the intellectual arrest of God's most amazing creation, this mind. That's why Isaac Watts' poem said what? Why do the nations join to slay the Lord's anointed son? Why do they cast his laws away and tread his gospel down? Here's what Chesterton said in his book Orthodoxy. But the new rebel is a skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. We like to rebel. The new rebel is a skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never really be a revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything really gets in his way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern revolutionist doubts not only by the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. Thus he writes one book complaining that imperial oppression insults the purity of women, and then he writes another book about the sex problem, which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan in the Middle East because Christian girls are exploited, and then curses Mrs. Grundy because she forces exploitation. As a politician, he will cry out that war is a waste of life, and then as a philosopher that all life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant and then prove by higher philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. This man will denounce marriage as a lie and denounce aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. And he goes on, he says, therefore the modern man in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything. And that's where we are. Rebelling against everything, but having lost our right to rebel against anything. Because there are no foundational principles saying on this line I will stand and on this line I will die. When I began my speaking career and Mr. Zig-Ziglar said, son, you're going to be my last salesman for America, someone said, but you'll lose engagements. I said, so what? I'll still have America. Till you have stood in line waiting for this embassy door to open and give you a chance to come into the land of the free and the home of the brave, you will never understand what I'm saying. Till you have actually seen your relatives wait 13 years so they can have the joy you're experiencing because I want to do it legally, you'll never understand what I'm saying. But as you travel around the world, when you see the lines in front of the U.S. Embassy, you will realize, regardless of all the nonsense, it is still the only place in the world where people say, just let me get there, I may have hope. But our foundations are eroding. Our foundations are eroding because we're not asking the basic questions. In foundation, you have to ask yourself 6 questions. And I want you to think like an investigative journalist. An investigative journalist, and this comes from the Columbia School of Journalism, the holy grail of being an investigative journalist is always asking the 6 questions. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. If you're able to look through that lens and ask yourself who, what, when, where, why, and how, things will begin to change. You can change someone else's behavior by what we call anticipation. By the same token, understand there's no such thing as anticipatory grief because tomorrow will bring its own problems. But we have to rise up and do something. I was telling some folks last night, Brian Tracy used to say, if you're incapable of doing anything, set yourself on fire. At least let other people come to watch you burn. But when we wake up in the morning at the foundation and you look through the window, do you look with an aim frame or a blame frame? An aim frame is possibility that there is still hope, that this is the last bastion of freedom and goodness. A blame frame is, oh, all is woe and we worry about stuff. See, I wasn't born in America. You figured that out? But when I die, I've made my decision. I'm either going to be buried in Arizona or Georgia so I can continue to vote. But the reality is, one of the things is you can win people over by using logic and common sense and make sure that the facts are on your side. And that's why Ben Shapiro says, my facts don't care about your feelings. But if you go back to what Lecky, when he said that we have gone away from objective morality, right, wrong, yes, no, good, bad, black, white, to subjective morality. My head likes it, my heart believes it, you better applaud it and you better approve it. And now we got a whole world dealing with feelings. In fact, the other day I was talking about something and someone says, maybe he doesn't know. I overheard them and I said, no, he knows. He just doesn't care. There are 8.2 billion people on planet right now, and there's only one you. God in His infinite wisdom and created order already decided ahead of time. In Isaiah it says, before you came as forth, before you were in your mother's womb, I had already ordained you a prophet to the nations. You go forward, he says, if you use me, you will speak wisely. If you don't, I'll make you look like a fool. And when did we go at a foundational level, being one nation under God, to one nation trying to justify God? When I speak in public and people say, well, it sounds like you're a Christian, I said, I need to apologize to you. It shouldn't sound like it. I am. Says, does that alienate anybody? I said, I don't know, but there are three things I do know. One, there is a God. Two, it ain't me. And three, it ain't you either. No, I don't have time for this because America's Judeo-Christian heritage, whether you like it or not, that's a reality. But this separation of church and state at a foundation level is the biggest bunch of bunk because it's never separation of church from state. If you read the letter that the West Danbury Baptist wrote to Thomas Jefferson as the president when he was away in France, his reply to them was, the truth that I will believe in my sovereign responsibility is that there will always be a wall of separation between church and state, which means he didn't say that we're going to tell you what to believe, but that protection was actually more for those that believe, because it always has and always will be the rights of the governed. Why are we scared of people who are making laws for us when all they take from us is my sacred, inalienable right given to me by and endowed with the Creator's blessing? It fascinates me. But all the erudite, think about it. Most of the sophistication in this world is being screwed up by the people who are supposedly the very erudite. The Texan, I love Texas, we only have 3 rules. If it's moving, we hug it. If it's not, we sell it. If it argues, we shoot it. And I remember a Texan goes to Harvard. And Harvard, of course, is sophisticated. You have to pronounce it differently because it's in New England. You have to Harvard. And the Texan says, excuse me, can you tell me where the library is at? And the guy says, you country bumpkin, you're probably from the South. This is the sophisticated Northeast. We do not end a sentence with a preposition. Texans are quick. He said, excuse me, kind sir, can you tell me where the library is at? Idiot. Now it doesn't end in a preposition. Common sense is not common practice. That's why we're losing the wars and losing all these arguments, because we're not standing on our ground. And one of the things I was sharing with Jesse is I don't take lip from anybody because I'm faster than they are on the draw. Someone said, well, what political party are you? I said, I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Republican. Now you figure it out. The ball's in your court. Don't throw stuff my way and expect it to stink. I mean, the logic of this see, in logic, Aristotelian rhetoric, the very first thing they teach you in debate and communication is the law of non-contradiction, which are two things cannot exist in its same way with the same relationship. Someone is wrong. So this logic of, I don't believe in an either-or option, I believe in an and also. It fails the test of logic because what they're saying is, I believe that it has to be and also and not either-or. So the either-or also always works. What he's saying is either it has to be the and also or nothing. And you're saying, wait a minute, that was just verbal gymnastics. No, that's just a thread. It's common sense. And what we are losing the argument is we are arguing with people because we are looking at foundations and they have eroded the foundations. Case in point, they don't talk about mercy anymore. It's always justice. When you take mercy out of the equation, the mercy given by a mercy giver means there is a moral law and a moral lawgiver. When we jettison a moral law and jettison a moral lawgiver, we can very easily go to justice. Justice is what? Throughout human history, it's actually not been a very beneficial term. It's been a derogatory term for the simple reason that justices are elected to do something and they just have to enforce. But if you look at American history, our founding fathers were so brilliant. The Congress was the most powerful, executive second, and these guys wearing black robes and eating Twinkies for breakfast were the least important. But everything revolves around what these 9 people think. When nobody ever gave them a right to begin with, they're the least important. They just have to enforce what Congress has already approved. And we have reversed the process, and somehow the governed are looking, saying, what happened? Foundations are eroding. Unless you ask what, why, who. For example, I'll always be an immigrant from India. Nobody can change that. But people come to me and use all the hyphenation. I said, hyphenation takes away pride. It doesn't add glory. I mean, call me Indian, call me American, but adding an Indian American doesn't change anything. The reality of this is common sense does prevail. I'll give you an illustration and I'll prove a point. One of the things the Republican Party says is we're the big tent party. Well, so is a circus. It's not about the tent. It's about the yokels inside doing the three-ring circus. But you want a good here tent story? Arthur Conan Doyle had a fictional character by the name of Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes had a trusted sidekick by the name of Watson, Dr. Watson, the analytical one. One day, Holmes and Watson were on the side of a mountain. Around 2 a.m, Holmes nudges Watson and says, "Watson, old chap, look up, what do you see?" And Watson says, "Oh, wow, Holmes, when I look, I see millions of stars. So astronomically, I marvel that there are billions of galaxies. Astrologically, I believe Saturn is in Leo. Meteorologically, I believe it's going to be a clear day tomorrow. Orologically, I believe it's about 2 a.m. Why, Holmes, what do you see?" He said, "Watson, you idiot, someone stole our tent." And we are going through majoring in minors. We don't see stuff for what it is. We're worrying about stuff. See, there's certain things you can't change. I was sharing with the group last night. There's certain things in the policies and procedures of at Clark County or Nevada State or in the nation, they're givens. You go through the bylaws, you go through the voting process. Some people are unhappy, some people are happy. And here's just a freebie. If 2 people agree on everything, one of them is not necessary. Dissent is part of human nature. I've been married 35 years, the best 18 years of her life. For the first 17, I had all the right answers, but they were apparently wrong. So give or take, we need to realize that fundamental fallacy that when you're some things are given. Policies and procedures of a nation, the legal documents that govern us, the history that defines us, the currencies that liberate us, our heroes, these are all givens. And you can topple statues, you can erase history, but you will only be able to address the scar if you feel a wound. Nothing physical, nothing surreal is going to satisfy that wound. It's just not going to happen. It's window dressing, but they're givens. The next thing is uncontrollable. Act of nature, wrath of God, 9/11. Suddenly the world alters. I had one of the most harrowing experiences after 9/11. I mean, I've trained people at the Justice Department when I was with Zig-Ziglar. I've trained the marshals. I've done prison work. I've trained USAREC battalions. I mean, I've done the beat from the PAC command in Hawaii all the way to the National Guard troops who were called into deployment in Katrina. I've trained all of them. But one thing I do know is that when 9/11 happened, my life changed quite drastically because they published the picture of the hijackers, and 17 of them had spent time in the country of Pakistan. Some had spent time in India. And I asked the people at the federal marshals, "What's your definition of a terrorist physically?" They said, "Someone who's about 6 feet tall, has facial hair." Duh. So I'm supposed to get on a plane 4 days later and I'm on a flight to Tampa. By God's grace, the privilege of the airline and the benefit of a career that has done really well in achieving the American dream, I get to sit in the front of the plane. And there was nobody flying 4 days after 9/11. Folks, I'm still the guy when nobody was flying during 9/11 and the airports were empty and the national anthem played, I stood up and took off my hat. That's how I believe in this country. So I said it'll fix itself. But the rest of the world, for the very first time, saw fear at their doorstep. I've seen fear all my life. I have participated in things that you would consider absolute atrocities at the receiving end of punishment. I have been the recipient of police brutality, and that day I was actually the lucky one. I wrote about it in my book, The American Dream with an Indian Heart, when a police baton felled me during a riot, and I was the lucky one because I actually had friends who were able to drag me away from the stampede. Many died that day. I'd seen a lot of this, but I never experienced what I experienced when someone else saw fear for the first time. There was another lady in first class, and when I got up to use the restroom, real panic hit her. She says, "Oh my God, it's one of them." And I'll never forget the humiliation as they literally grabbed me by my collar and asked me to sit in one corner of the airport, in the airplane, and not say anything. I could have reacted. But the hardest thing was when I came home and my boy had been sent home from school because someone said, damn all these foreigners, send him home. My heart broke for my son. I chose it for him. He didn't deserve that. I deserve it. I chose it for myself. But that day, my pastor called and said, will you speak about what you told me in private, my profile and courage? Because when my son came home that day, I told him, I said, son, we cannot change one iota of who we are, where we came from, who our ancestors were, or what someone did to them. But from this day forward, I will traverse the length and breadth of this country. I will study her history. I will understand her heroes. I will memorize her renditions, and I will make you proud. So one day as you walk the paved streets of this amazing land, I want people to say, Nicholas, I am so glad your dad came to America. He changed my life. Ultimately, at the foundation level, the only thing you can do is ask yourself, what do we want to build? And if we choose to build it, asking ourselves those qualifying questions, what is your part? What is your role? See, most people will stand in front of the mirror, that mirror, mirror on the wall, do I have a prayer at all? I'm saying stand in front of the mirror and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, here I am, what's my call? The time is now. You can sit by the wayside. It's not about President Trump or President Clinton or any of those other things. Those are not the issues. When you look at the party, the Republican Party, and you look at what it stands for at its core essence, this is what every hard-working person in this country who wakes up with one word in their mind, dignity, wants. It's not about the promises and all of the other stuff. I work in companies half the time and I tell them, hey, listen, you guys practice the 10 Commandments, you just don't want to admit it. They said, how? I said, try killing someone on the job. That's nonsense. That's just spin. But the reality is, as I talk to people, right from the coal miners of West Virginia to the displaced lumberjacks in the Pacific Northwest, when automation hit their companies, all of them just say one thing: I want dignity in purpose. In my book, The American Dream, I wrote, we're not poor, we're too cheap to afford the once available commodity of dignity. We have ransacked the cellars of human pride and looted the morals that form the fabric of a responsible people. There is right and wrong, yes and no, black and white, good and bad. Stop the charade. We need to stand and be counted. See, don't go through life being counted. Go through life being counted on. And something radically changes. And I know some of you are saying, wait a minute, they said he was a motivational speaker, but right now he's knocking the stuffing out of me. I am a motivational speaker. I am known as an inspirational speaker. I've been known to take people from laughter to tears and back. But when I'm done, some of you will like me, some of you will dislike me, and that's okay. But I want you to walk out of here with only one word in your heart. Do I have the consistency in my own desire to wake up with dignity because of where I live and offer hope to others because we get to live here? It's not hard. You walk into a restaurant, you pay for somebody else. That's a simple principle. It's easy enough to do. But one of the things, I remember I was standing in front in the airline counter, and there was a lady in front of me. She comes from Hollywood, as Michael Medved would say. I don't know if the years have been kind to her, but her assistance and makeup has. But she was obnoxious, and I don't use profanity because I'm a clean guy, so I don't use profanity, but let me see, because I'm a wordsmith, how would I think? Well, that day she was acting like an equine posterior. Okay, so that may come close. All right? She did not want to show her ID. This was before voting. This was just to get on the plane. She didn't want to show her ID. And the flight attendant said, ma'am, it's a post-9/11 world. Everybody needs to show our ID. And she says, don't you know who I am? I says, well, it doesn't matter. Even if I know who you are, I need to see your ID. So then she gets on the phone and proceeds to berate this person on the phone to somebody in California, saying, you will not believe these stupids in the Dallas airport, a bunch of ignoramuses, and she was going on a tirade. Now, that's my airport. I fly through there twice a week. And I have practiced a principle since the very day I landed here. When I see stupidity, I stop it. I tap the celebrity on the shoulder. I said, ma'am, at Terminal D on Thursdays at 11 o'clock, all of us celebrities have to show our ID. She said, who are you? I said, Gandhi. Eleanor Roosevelt said, if someone has to tell you who are, you ain't. But the flight attendant was so excited, she bumped me up to first class on that trip. I remember that. But that's what we have. We have this identity crisis now because everybody's walking out because they have no foundation. I was sharing with the McPhee family yesterday that, and with some of the others, the great state of Iowa. There's an article that was sent to me by a police detective in Dallas. The article simply said, in the state of Iowa, the Iowa Register, whichever paper was advertising this story or showing the story, in one of the schools, there is a student who identifies as a cat. No, I mean, you're entitled to it. That's fine. It doesn't bother me. But that's the thing. And I thought, wow, that's a bizarre story. That was not the bizarre part. The bizarre part was the school board has decided that it's okay, we're not a veterinary school yet, but before we get there, we need to make her comfortable. So they put a box of kitty litter both in the classroom and in the restroom. No, I'm an observational communicator, and I'm thinking, when aliens come from wherever they come from and land on Earth and say, we need to go to the point in America where the beginning of the electoral process begins every 4 years to elect the leader of the free world. Guess where they go? Iowa. And these aliens will walk into Iowa and see a kid pretending to be a cat. And they'll say, we don't need to worry about Earth. This is the best they got. That's where we are. It's a sad indictment on ourselves. This is what we have let this beautiful nation become. That in 1969 put a man on the moon when a Democratic president in the 1960s said, let us come together as a nation and put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. And the engineers at NASA said it was because one man believed in the collective intelligentsia of all of us that we decided to do that. And America, when they planted the flag on the moon, did it, beat the Soviets at it. Not a bayonet was wielded, not a bullet was fired, and we achieved lunar supremacy. It can be done. After World War II, Japan, they said, a country where grass would not grow for 200 years because of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Japanese came together and said, by the 60s, let us become dominant in textiles. They did. By the 70s, let us pursue the pursuit in automobiles. They did. By the 80s, they went into a different thing. Now, here's a country smaller than the size of California having to import steel from other parts of the world and convert it, having import ore from other parts of the world, convert it into malleable steel, build it in their factories, and export it back and do it at less. And the reason the Japanese succeeded, and this is an indictment on ourselves because of our own hierarchical thinking. We don't think individually, we think collectively. If you let someone else row your boat, they're going to take it to where they want to go, not where you want to go. In Toyota, there are 6 people from the head of Toyota to the guy at the plant. In some of the American car companies, there are 27 levels. We're so hung up on titles. I remember meeting a guy the other day on a plane. I said, what do you do? He said, well, I'm the East Coast director of West Coast distribution for products manufactured in the Southwest. I said, dude, you're a salesman. Why are we afraid to admit who we are? Why this pretense? This pretense is we have made it easy to add identities. But God, in His infinite wisdom, created us as man and woman. But we want to fight this. And I'm telling this to you as conservatives. I don't want to rock the boat. Yep, trust me, it's already there. First you said, man, all they're asking me is to accept. So I did it. No harm, no foul. Then they said, now that you've accepted, why don't you acknowledge? So I did it. Then they said, now that you've accepted and acknowledged, why don't you go ahead and approve? So we said, okay, I'm not going to vote for it, but others may, but it may be passed into law, may not be. Ultimately, we're, a heteronomous society. We elect people. We're not autonomous, so and so. Then the people who were the beneficiaries said, now that you've accepted, acknowledged, and approved, we're going to have a parade. Why don't you applaud? And you are saying, wait a minute, when did this happen? While you were having your Frappuccino. I remember one guy came in to me, can you believe how expensive Starbucks is? I said, are you the last of the idiots? The very word says bucks. I mean, if you're suffering from low self-esteem, go to Starbucks where a small is a tall. Other than that, the whole thing in this world is, see, capitalism has always been the uneven distribution of wealth. Communism has always been the even distribution of misery. Pick a side. But we want to straddle the hedge because we want to be nice. Well, you see a turtle on a fence post, you can rest assured it didn't get there by itself. By the same token, if you have to swallow a frog, you don't want to look at that sucker too long. He ain't going to get no prettier. We have to wake up, which is the second mood I want to paint for you. And as the Baptist minister would say, I'm not done, but I'm powerfully close. The second mood is definition, pride and malice. And here's what I want to think. Here's something I wrote this morning, and maybe I'll read that for you. Being elected does not make you a leader of the people you serve. It makes you a servant of those you are elected to lead. When I go back to the greatest election ever in the history of humanity, it took place in the upper room. One man had 12 people, and one was going to betray him. And he knew everything up front. And yet, he takes the cloth that he was girded with and washes their feet. And the only one that day whose feet were not washed. My definition of servant leadership since then has been this. Whether you're secular or sacred, bend so low and only look at the feet of those you're serving, not their eyes. But when they look over you, they will see either the God or the goodness that sent you. But we need to have, thank you, Gracie. I'm a southern boy. I was so parched, I was burping dust. So once in the definition, basically, we have a right. But the only right we have is because it was given. So we have a right that is given automatically yields responsibility. And let me paint that again for you as a schematic. Every thought you have about what is right or wrong manifests into ideas about who you are. Every thought you have about what is right or wrong begins to manifest into ideas about who you are. Every set of ideas results in certain habits that form. Every set of habits become the behavior that makes you conform. Behavior reveals your character. Character shapes your destiny. The very way you think. So when you have a healthy self-pride, then suddenly you believe you belong. But if you have false pride, that's vanity. Have you ever noticed some people will brighten up a whole room by leaving? These are the same people who walk around looking like someone's licked all the red off their candy. Most days they look like the cruise director for the Titanic, and they want to give you and me hope. But they're talking heads. Someone is writing their speeches, and you can spot a fake. And people say, how do you spot a fake? I've done prison work for 30 years. And the last time I was in a prison in Central Florida, a group of people serving life in prison had asked me to come. And I said, I'll only come if you let me spend the day with you. There's nothing great about what I do. But when I bend so low and see the feet of the prisoners, my Lord will say, when I was in prison, you came to see me. We have to take care of the disenfranchised. We have to take care of the elderly. We have to take care of the widows. It's our mandate. But we do it cheerfully. We do it in a giving way. We teach them things to do. We don't sacrifice any of the goodness of who we are as human beings. But in doing so, you will yield to them dignity. This is where our side is different from the other side, because the other side says, I'm going to give it to you, but I have no requirement from you. We give, but we say we have a requirement, but we don't know how to sell that requirement. When I asked Mr. Ziglar, can I become an international speaker and trainer? I was a lowly telemarketer carrying his briefcase and getting his shoes shined. He says, sign this blank piece of paper. When I signed the blank piece of paper, he says, today I commit to being a 10-year overnight success. I remember taking him to India, land of my birth, 2005. The Indian people didn't want to have anything to do with me. They wanted the white wizard to speak. They reluctantly gave me 1 hour on the program. Mr. Ziglar, when the seminar was over, called me to the front. He asked the 300 powerful executives of India, stand. They didn't want to stand. They wanted to decide when they stood. But because this man, the genius who had written 29 books, 9 had made the bestseller list, at that time was charging $75,000 a speech. So when he went, it was $500. When he says stand, you stand. Then he took a side to the step. And he looked at me. And he said, boy, take a bow. And I took a bow. And he says, applaud your son, your native son. Because of how well he talked about your country, I decided to come all this distance. But I want to give you the real secret of why this is my boy. Over 25 years ago, you sent me a boy who was scared. I bring you back a man who is my legacy. When you get to the pinnacle of your journey within the party, when you get to the pinnacle of your life within the city, when you get to the zenith of your accomplishment as a person, do you look around and see loneliness? Or do you see all the hands that now uphold you? Folks, don't look forward to where we want to go on the mountaintop. Look at the valley we are in right now. The food you eat on the mountaintop only grows in the valley. Nothing grows on the mountaintop. Instead of looking there to what we want to accomplish, look back to where we came from and bring enough of those people to where we are, and on their shoulders they'll take us to the mountaintop. I'm an immigrant. I live in a border state. I understand the process. When I'm asked a question, and maybe someday in the Q&A I can give you some of the thing, but there's a way in which you answer questions. There's a way in which you communicate and do it in a winsome way. But the one thing you have to understand as you're trying to expand your horizons is this. Whenever you're in a tough spot, always question the assumption of whoever has painted you into that corner. People don't want your answer. When a person comes and tells me I'm an atheist, I know he's lying because he's telling me I'm absolutely sure there are no absolutes. That's a logical fallacy. I was speaking in South Carolina, a guy says, I'm an atheist. I said, I'll pray for you. He says, I don't believe in God. I said, then it shouldn't bother you if he doesn't answer. What's your problem? His anger is not that there is a God or not God. His anger is that I have joy. And most liberals are angry at you because you have peace. It's almost as if liberalism is bent on the desire that we have to be unhappy. We have to be miserable. We have to be angry. We have to have vitriol. And we don't need to counter that with noise. We counter that with silence. You counter that with action. And there's a way to do that, and in the Q&A we'll deal with that. Two more motifs and then I'll be done. I create a formula for you which is called How Then Shall We Move. Merge the lane of truth. Never stray away from what you believe to be absolute truth. Merge the lane of truth. Overcome the frame of lies. This is how you move, M-O-V-E. Merge the lane of truth. Overcome the frame of lies. You can spot a lie, we just don't call it what it is. Vocalize. Voice the importance of value and engage in the exchange of ideas. See, everything you present in this world has to have a beginning, has to have an end, has to have a meaning, and has to have a morality. Origin, purpose, morality, destiny. No matter what we sell in this world, if it doesn't answer those four through, we're selling a lie. Everything has to have an origin. Where did this begin? It just can't come out of an ether. And a lot of what we see from the other side is just, in fact, I did a podcast the other day and it's quite fascinating. I said, this is the first time in human history we have the simultaneous fall of common sense and rise of ignorance by the same person in the same action. It's craziness. I mean, when a person stands up and tells you that my claim to fame is I have a degree in economics, I'll buy it. You may have a degree in economics, that's fine. My contribution to this world is I'm a bartender. So now I've earned the right with my degree in economics and my vast job experience as a bartender to provide policy and tell all of you that you can no longer do anything that is electrical. We're going to have $16 trillion and we're going to go green. And someone asks you the question, well, how do we get to Hawaii? They're still part of America. Well, they have to figure out a tunnel or something. At that point, any person worth his salt should just turn their back and say, that Billy Madison dialogue, whatever you have said has made no sense. Collectively, we are all dumber because of this experience. I give you 0 points and just walk away. But we don't, it's asinine. I tell people one day my prayer is that before I die, someone will put me on the show The View. I've never watched it. But I only want to ask one question to one of the women there. And you'll know who when I finish the bit. I want to look her in the eye and say, was there ever a moment of happiness in your family where your family saw you as a twinkling little child and said, we'll call her Joy? What happened? But that's the world. This show has been on 25 years. And it only happens if you let it. And the irony is, a majority of the people watching it at home are actually conservative people who have the ability to be at home. Scary. I've been on both sides of this equation, and I've spoken in the inner city, I've spoken on the outer banks, and I tell you this, as sure as the sun will rise tomorrow. Some things are right and some things are wrong, and most people you talk to, I'm telling you, I've had people who disagree with me come to me and say, I've never heard it presented that way. You have to peel away the veneer and ask them. Because at the bottom, everybody wants to be happy, to be healthy, to be reasonably prosperous, to have friends, to have security, to have peace of mind, to have good family relationships, and to have hope in tomorrow. And when Mr. Zig-Ziglar wrote that in See You at the Top, it revolutionized thought process. But in that, he has two pivotal stories I want to give you, because this is what we need to overcome. Skepticism, not from others, our own belief if we can pull it off. Many of you listening to me saying, it sounds like a good game and this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about, but I can't pull that off. Why not? Oh, what if I fail? No, you will fail the first time. But when you try something you never tried before and you fall flat on your face, you break even. You didn't have it to begin with, you came up short, big whoop, you don't lose. Failure has never been a person, it has always been an event. You can fail at something, you cannot fail as someone. God loves you too much. It's crazy to think the way we think because of the skepticism and that natural tendency to fight the urge. Can I pull this off? Of course you can. But you have to believe you belong. Success is not looking at the isms and schisms in your life that prevent you from being an orator or a candidate. Success is going to where success is and hoping by sheer centripetal force you're sucked in. Throughout human history, that's how it worked. That's how leaders were born. Someone asked me, are leaders born or made? Before they're made, they have to be born. It's common sense. But we add attributes that have no bearing in reality. Think about it. We live in a nation where they say the safest place in the airport, they name the terminal. The same people, and we have pilots in the room, they'll come on and say, we're primarily here for your safety. And then they'll instruct, what you have back there is my chosen crew. They're obeying my orders, so you need to follow their orders. Fine, I'll buckle up. Whether it's a 7-seater or 747, when they say buckle up, everybody buckles up. I've never heard one person say, well, tell the captain the admiral ain't going to do it. We all do it. Now, when you're driving in your car in your neighborhood, some of you don't buckle up because you think that seatbelt is just a contraption that they had an extra one off, so they put it there. National Safety Board insurance adjusters have said very clearly that if you're in your car and you have your seatbelt on, chances are 3 in 5 you'll live. But I've flown over 5 million miles, and I can say this with complete surety. I don't care how well you buckled up there. If something happens to that sucker, you're going to die. And every airline will tell you the only reason they need you buckled up is not because they want you to be safe. It is after the crash, they know who sat where. It's just convenience because you don't get very far from your seat when you're splattered. Now you're saying that's morbid. I fly tomorrow. Don't worry. You want to hear another lie? They get up and say, ladies and gentlemen, in case of an emergency, your seat bottom cushion could be used as a flotation device. Yep, right, I'll buy that. You just told me that I'm in a bird that ain't going to fly, but the seat's going to float? In selling, we say, nobody's buying it, stop selling it. As George Carlin would say, what's the use of the announcement? Please take all your personal belongings with you. Oh, you mean I can leave the public water fountain I brought with me? Everything I have is a personal belonging. But it's nonsense. One of the new rules, stay masked up. This is the first time in human history both the ventriloquist and the dummy are masked. We don't know whose lips are moving, but someone's talking and one's a doctor. And I'm Indian, so I'm half doctor. I know he's making it up. But on the plane, she came on the other day from Tampa and said, occasionally when you're eating or drinking, you can take your mask down. The dude next to me, big old bag of Doritos, one at a time, all the way from Tampa. What am I going to do? He's following the rules. Here's why we're losing. Rules without a relationship always lead to rebellion. You want to sell something? Explain why, not how. When you explain why, it becomes formulaic. January just went. What is the number one goal that Americans set? Weight loss. Husband says you got to lose the weight. Wife says you got to lose the weight. Doctor says you got to lose the weight. Finally, the poor sap says, I'll do it. For 13 days, he steamed everything. Broccoli, dashboard, cardboard, headboard. He ate every god-awful thing. And day number 14, some dirty dog rolled the pastry cart by. With considerable disdain that comes from lack of discipline, this poor schmuck said, I'll eat one lousy donut. While the powdered sugar is still fresh on his upper lip, someone else came and said, 2 for 1 chicken fried steak. You want to go? And he said to himself, que sera, sera. I've already blown it today. I'll start back up tomorrow. We need a goals program that is not chronological. You want to lose weight any day of the year when you start, guess what? Here's the news. 365 days later, it's another year. But why January 1? It's sold. It's a resolution. It's a cry. And once we get past that thinking, something miraculous begins to happen. Let's look at the conclusion here. The benchmarks of excellence. I want to read from you something I wrote. This is Muggeridge's quote, actually. He says, the depravity of man is at once the most empirically verifiable reality, but at the same time, the most intellectually resisted fact. Last night, when I was with a group of patriots, I wrote a poem that I shared a poem with them, and I think some of you heard that today on a podcast. But I'm going to read that poem for you, then I'm going to hush, and we're going to open it up for questions, comments, or snide remarks. Anything, it's fair game. You can ask me any question under the sun. There is no preparation in this. It can be as toxic as you want, as combative as you desire. We'll take them one at a time, and we'll try to figure that out. I want to give you ample time to make sure you can engage with me. But this is the poem called The American Grave I wrote last year that seemed to have touched a lot of people. But the most heartwarming response I ever got was from a Gold Star widow who said, can you come and speak at an event I'm hosting? I lost my husband after 4 tours, and when I saw that an immigrant like you from another country could write this particular poem, I now know that his sacrifice was not in vain. So the poem starts with deep hurt of where we are as a nation, but ends with great hope of where we can be as a people. The land of the free and the home of the brave, now a cauldron of sin and freedom's grave, turning from truth and spreading and parading lies, ignoring her people and their cries. The last bastion once of global good, she has fallen far from where she stood. A great beacon of peace and light, she is now a grave of her people's plight. Alas, dear patriot, it's not too late for truth to veto this unfair fate. Rise from this grave with American pride and sound the alarm of Revere's ride. For we must not let evil win or fear the legality of mortal sin, as this grave dug by man and race is covered by the Creator's grace. The God who endowed us with a sign remains forever our divine. His law alone can turn the page to raise us from this grave with rage. The glory of this our flying flag will not behind let anyone lag. Spring from this grave far and wide. History and truth are on your side. The time is now, and the people you. to voice and shout this call anew, that this nation's grave will never fill, for her patriots still stand on the hill.